The town I grew up in was pretty country, to put it lightly. Nothing but farms, crops, abandoned churches, and ugly worn-down houses. Everyone around us was pretty broke. Property taxes were like $11,000 a year. If that, with that came a lot of sketchball characters. Hell, even our neighbor was a weirdo. Nice, but weird. We weren't well off ourselves, but things at least got a little better for my family when my siblings and I were old enough to work too. When this app, hot or not, was still a thing many years back. I matched this girl Kelly, who I started seeing for a while. We matched in late summertime, and we were seeing each other through September. Already this was early October. Kelly and I were looking for a nice cheap date to go on. Really, there wasn't much to do around there. We've gone on hikes, explored, and gotten food. Not much else going on, so we took a new route in the car this day. So where neither of us had been, just to find something, we found this little restaurant sitting in a random parking lot on the side of the road. It had outdoor seating, so we went there. It was a warm, cloudy day when we arrived and got seated at a table outside the restaurant. We were there for 45 minutes to an hour, and after leaving it grew noticeably foggy out. We continued to drive down this route we'd never been down before, a really desolate road with just open fields and farmland on either side, with occasional patches of trees and woods. Then we passed something different. It was a sign for a pumpkin patch, only it was a very cheaply made sign. It wasn't some big billboard or anything like that. It was a wooden picket sign that said pumpkin picking this way, and an arrow pointing to the right. Right behind the sign was a dirt driveway cutting through the field. Through the fog, we saw a house that the driveway led to, so a spur of the moment decision, we both agreed we wanted to check it out, because why not? I drove off the road down the driveway, and we passed the house into this back area, which was covered by trees in two directions. The left side and the far back side, tucked between the house and woods, was this big pumpkin patch. It was a genuine pumpkin farm, and we saw at least 200 pumpkins scattered all over the place. And that was just what the fog allowed us to see. We parked next to this old jalopy of a pickup truck, the only other vehicle visible on the property. We noticed an older couple sitting on the back deck of the house. As we got out, the two of them got up and greeted us. I said, "We're here for the pumpkin picking," and the old woman said with a smile, "Welcome, pick anything you'd like." I asked her how much it would be for a pumpkin, and the old woman said it's free. We were surprised. The fog was acting as a sort of barrier, so we couldn't clearly see the two. It was a little creepy, but I could still tell that it looked like the old man was smiling at Kelly. His smile was very gummy. It was kind of gross. We both said thank you and started walking into the pumpkin patch. A lot of the pumpkins were on the smaller side, were mushy and just not very attractive. The ground was also kind of wet from the fog, I guess, and some of the pumpkins felt wet and muddy too. It was hard to find a really nice one, but eventually we did find one. I picked up this big, healthy looking pumpkin. It was heavy. I brought it over to the back deck where the old couple just was. They weren't there anymore. I asked Kelly if we should just leave. She said probably. It really felt like we were clear to leave since we already thanked the couple and they made it clear they were free. So we got back in the car and I started doing a 3-point turn on the dirt driveway to leave when we heard someone yelling outside. We both got startled and turned to face the house, where we saw a middle-aged man in a cap yelling, "Hey, stop." I lowered the window and he put his face through the window and yelled, "What the hell are y'all doing? I'm calling 911. I said, "What do we do?" And he said, "Put that pumpkin back right now." Kelly and I, talking over each other, both tried to explain to the man that the older couple told us to take whatever we wanted. I assumed they were his parents. The man said, "What older couple? What are you talking about?" They replied, "Are your parents also here?" He said, "I ain't got no parents." Kelly and I, both equally confused, looked at each other. I said, "Sir, there was an older couple sitting on your back deck 10 minutes ago, and they told us to take whatever we wanted." The man said, "There ain't no "Older couples here," he asked where the pumpkin is. I told him in the back. I unlocked the door, and he grabbed the pumpkin. He said if we ever came back here, he'd shoot us. And then he spit at the ground and walked back to his house. I drove us out of there. We were as confused as could be. We considered the idea that maybe it was a joke, but that would be a real sick joke. I made a joke saying, what if they were ghosts? And Kelly said stop, clearly freaked out, but then I got the chills myself as I thought about what I just said. There was silence in the car for a few seconds, and I know we both pondered that idea out of curiosity. One day my two siblings went to that pumpkin farm to go pumpkin picking. They bought a pumpkin from the guy we saw, and they probed him a bit, asking about the farm and if the man lives there with anyone. The man said he lives there alone. This was unsettling to hear. It truly to this day doesn't make a lick of sense. Could the man have been lying about the older couple being there? I don't know, possibly, but why the scarier question is, what if he wasn't lying and he truly does live alone? Then who were those people? Fall had just started, and around here the weather becomes cool and breezy, and in my opinion, it's the best type of weather. It's definitely my favorite season, and last year it was no different. Around early October I went out and bought some Halloween decorations before work one day, planning to set them up outside. Once I got home, due to a coworker calling off, though I had to stay late and didn't get out until 700, I drove home as quickly as I could and started getting to work. It was kind of dark out, but with my outdoor lights on it wasn't too bad. I started with setting up the orange lights on my bushes, and as I did, some guy came around the side of my house. He startled me just walking up without saying a word. I found it kind of rude, so I made sure to tell him off. Hey, you're on my property, can you leave? The guy looked at me with a straight face and said sure thing, and started wandering down to the road. He looked 40 with short brown hair, and the way he was acting was almost like he was homeless or something. He had no care in the world and seemed to have no direction. I continued with setting up the lights, but I couldn't help but notice that the man never really left. He was on the other side of the road wandering around, and several times I even caught him looking over at me. It was really creepy, and I ended up just going inside after finishing the lights. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was doing by my house. I tried to tell myself it was just some harmless homeless man with no sense of boundaries, and went on with my night. I made dinner and went up to my room to watch some TV in bed. As I was upstairs, I heard something below me. It sounded like something slowly sliding on the ground. I paused the TV, but I couldn't hear it anymore. On any normal day, I probably wouldn't even check it out, but having seen that guy earlier, I just had a weird feeling, so I got up and walked downstairs. Strangely, I noticed right away that all the lights were off, which I could have sworn I didn't turn off yet. I walked a little further and into the hallway, flicking on the overhead light, then stopping to listen again. It was still quiet, however, there was a low ambient noise. It was wind howling through the rooms. I moved up to the back of the house, where I could now see the sliding back door was wide open. I felt my stomach tighten, knowing that's exactly what I heard from upstairs, someone slowly opening the back door. At this point, I wasn't sure if I should just run out of the house or run back upstairs to get my phone. The answer is probably obvious now, but in the moment it was hard to think straight. I wasn't even sure if someone had actually entered my home or not. I felt my adrenaline pumping as I called out, "Hello, who's there?" I walked up to the door and looked outside quickly, not seeing anyone. I then turned back around. Somehow I managed to spot the faintest outline of a person standing in the other room, completely covered by darkness. I let out a literal gasp when I saw them, and by doing that I think I unintentionally showed them that their cover was blown, because immediately after he came running at me, I only saw him in the light for a fraction of a second before running out the door, but I was sure it was the same man I saw outside. As I ran through my backyard, I could hear his footsteps catching up behind me. I ran up to the closest house and started banging on the door, screaming for help. Luckily, they opened up somewhat quickly, and as I entered their home, the man stood in their front yard and just stared me down. We called the cops, but the guy had run off. It's pretty clear that while I was at work that day, the man had broken the lock on my door. Then during the night, he tried to sneak inside my home. Had I not heard the door opening or not noticed him hiding in the dark, who knows what he would have done that. This happened several years ago in early October. I had 2 weeks off work and had taken a trip down to a cabin in the hills outside of my city. It was an Airbnb that was far out, which was perfect because I wanted to spend a few days camping as well. I drove 2 hours to the cabin and got there in the afternoon. It was really nice and quiet. No other cabins or buildings were in sight. It was just the woods going all around. I set my things inside and looked through the rooms, but it was nothing special. It had a very cozy, old-fashioned feel to it, not something I was a huge fan of, but it was a nice change of environment for a vacation. The rest of that night and the following few days went by with nothing of interest. I spent my time relaxing, sitting outside in the cold fall weather for most of the days and spending the nights inside by the fireplace. It was on the 5th day, though, that I set out with my camping gear. I wasn't sure how long exactly I was going to camp for, but planned for 2 to 3 nights. There were a couple trails nearby that I was aware of from planning ahead, but only one of them actually connected to the cabin. To keep things simple, I chose to just take that one so I could leave straight from the cabin and not have to drive anywhere. I walked for at least 3 or 4 hours before I found the spot. I was happy with this. Was the only clearing I'd found aside from the trail itself, but something would just feel uncomfortable about camping directly on the path. It was closing in on nighttime already, so I got my tent up and started a fire. As it got darker, I put on my heavy sweater and jacket. With the cold really starting to come in, I sat out by the fire for an hour, eating up a quick meal and waiting for myself to get more sleepy. But at some point while I was sitting there, my eyes caught sight of something, a figure walking out in the woods. I watched as they walked through the dark, no flashlight or anything, and disappeared in the distance. The only light in the woods was my campfire aside from the dim moonlight, so whoever was out there had to have seen me. It was so strange the way they were walking, though, just being out here in the woods with no light and not even following the trail. It made me feel really unnerved enough to think about taking the long walk back to the cabin, but I knew it wasn't safe to go out this late into the night. I stayed on watch for a half hour, checking everywhere, but not seeing any more signs of the person. After a while, I started getting tired, so I flattened the fire and let it burn out. But just as the glow faded into ashes, I heard footsteps coming from the left of the campsite. My eyes widened, looking into the woods and trying to force my eyes to adjust to the dark, but all I could see was a few feet ahead. The footsteps got louder, coming toward the campsite, getting close enough for me to think that they had to be just outside of my sight. But then they walked slightly off, staying in the dark and passing by, then continuing to walk away. They never stopped or did anything to show that they acknowledged that I was there, but the chances of them being out here at the exact place I was just impossible to be a coincidence. Once the footsteps were gone, I took out my flashlight and disassembled my tent, packing my things and going back to the trail. It wasn't ideal, but I could sense that something was off about whatever was going on. I walked quickly, keeping my flashlight on the trail and trying to keep myself calm. The woods were so quiet, though, just adding to the eeriness of the situation I'd found myself in. Although I had my doubts, I made it back to the cabin. It was still well into the night, and after walking so much that day on no sleep, I passed out on the couch just minutes after getting inside. My mind was so foggy I wasn't even really thinking about the person in the woods anymore. Being a 4-hour walk from where I'd seen them, I didn't feel I really had reason to be scared anymore. As I was passed out, though, I groggy woke up to a strange sound, something on the other side of the cabin, like wood scraping against the walls. My eyes shot open and I whipped my head around to face the back of the room, seeing the window slowly being pushed open by a man outside. His eyes immediately shifted onto me as I stood up, then he dropped the window and ran away. By the time I gotten over, he was well into the cover of the woods. I got everything together and left the cabin, driving to a hotel in a nearby town. Obviously, I don't know who that man was or what he was doing out there. Clearly he'd followed me though and tried to get inside the cabin while I was sleeping. If he had, there's no saying what would have